A retired Marine brought his old German Shepherd to work one ordinary morning, and within minutes, the dog refused to leave a baby's hospital room. Everyone thought Sherman had simply grown old and confused. But then another infant stopped breathing, and another, and another. While doctors searched for answers, the only one who seemed to know the truth was a battle-scarred dog that had once saved soldiers overseas. What Sherman was trying to warn them about wasn't inside the baby's crib. It was hidden deep inside the hospital walls. By the time anyone finally believed him, dozens of innocent lives were hanging by a thread. Stay with me, because this incredible story proves that sometimes the greatest heroes never say a single word. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. And if you believe animals are one of God's greatest gifts, don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories. The morning fog drifted lazily across the parking lot of St. Gabriel Medical Center, softening the sharp edges of another ordinary Tuesday. For Ethan Walker, every sunrise felt borrowed, another quiet gift after the wars he had survived but never truly left behind. At 43, Ethan had traded his Marine uniform for a faded work jacket, embroidered with the words, "Facility Maintenance." His knees ached every winter from old injuries in Afghanistan, and his left shoulder still clicked whenever he lifted heavy equipment. Yet he never complained. Broken things could still serve a purpose. He believed that because he lived it every day. Beside his maintenance cart walked Sherman. The aging German Shepherd moved more slowly than he once had, silver hairs dusting his muzzle, but his amber eyes remained sharp. Years ago, Sherman had been one of the military's finest explosive detection dogs. Together they had survived roadside bombs, collapsing buildings, and nights when instinct mattered more than orders. Now, Sherman simply accompanied Ethan to work. Officially, he was retired. Unofficially, the hospital staff had grown fond of the gentle old dog who greeted frightened children with quiet patience. "Easy day today, old friend," Ethan said, scratching behind Sherman's ear. "Just replace a few lights and fix another broken air handler." Sherman answered with a slow wag of his tail. Inside the neonatal intensive care unit, another kind of battle was unfolding. Olivia Carter hadn't slept more than 2 hours in nearly a week. Sitting beside the incubator, she watched her 8-month-old son Noah struggle through each fragile breath. Tiny tubes covered his face. Every soft beep from the monitors reminded her how little separated hope from heartbreak. She reached through the opening of the incubator and gently wrapped one finger around Noah's tiny hand. "I'm still here," she whispered. "You don't have to fight alone." A nurse adjusted the oxygen flow before offering Olivia an exhausted smile. "He's stable for now." For now. Those 2 words had become Olivia's entire world. Outside the room, Ethan knelt beside an electrical cabinet, replacing a damaged relay. Sherman lay quietly nearby, head resting on his paws, seemingly asleep. Then, without warning, his ears snapped upright, his nose lifted into the air, every muscle in his body tightened. Ethan froze. He had seen that posture only a handful of times in his life. Not during thunderstorms, not around strangers, only when Sherman had detected danger. The old dog stood slowly. Instead of looking toward the people passing through the hallway, Sherman stared down the corridor leading toward the NICU. A low, uneasy whine escaped his throat. "What's wrong, buddy?" Sherman ignored him. He walked several steps toward the nursery doors before stopping. His nose worked furiously. He sniffed the air vents, then the wall, then the polished floor beneath his paws. His breathing became quicker. Several nurses glanced over curiously. "It's okay," Ethan said, taking hold of Sherman's collar. "Come on." But Sherman refused. The old German shepherd planted his paws against the floor with surprising strength. Then he let out a deep, warning growl that echoed through the quiet hallway. Inside the NICU, little Noah's heart monitor suddenly shrieked. Every nurse rushed toward the incubator. Ethan's pulse quickened. Sherman wasn't looking at the baby. He was staring at something no one else could see. And after 12 years together, Ethan had learned one lesson he never dared ignore. Sherman was never wrong. The shrill alarm from Noah's monitor shattered the quiet rhythm of the neonatal intensive care unit. Within seconds, nurses flooded into the room. One adjusted the oxygen flow while another checked the infant's tiny pulse. "Doctor!" Melissa Grant hurried in behind them, her calm expression hiding years of experience dealing with frightened parents. "Oxygen saturation dropping. 86, 83. Increase support." Olivia stumbled backward, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold onto the side of the incubator. "Noah!" A respiratory therapist quickly repositioned the tiny oxygen cannula beneath the baby's nose. After several agonizing moments, the monitor slowly climbed again. 88. 90. A collective breath escaped the room. The crisis had passed. For now. Outside the glass doors, Ethan remained frozen. Sherman hadn't moved. The old German shepherd still stared toward the same corner of the hallway, his ears rigid, his nose working constantly. Not once did he look toward the doctors rushing around Noah. He wasn't interested in the people. He was following a scent only he could detect. Ethan slowly crouched beside him. "What are you smelling?" Sherman's tail remained perfectly still. Another low whine escaped his throat. It wasn't fear, it wasn't excitement, it was frustration, as if something dangerous stood directly in front of him, yet no one else could see it. One of the NICU nurses stepped outside. "You should probably take your dog home." Ethan nodded politely. "I'm sorry, he's never behaves like this." The nurse smiled kindly. "I'm sure he's sweet, but the babies need quiet." "I understand." Ethan gently tugged on the leash. "Come on, Sherman." Nothing. The old dog wouldn't even shift his weight. Instead, he lifted his head toward the ceiling, toward one of the large, silver ventilation ducts running above the hallway. His nostrils flared again. Then he turned sharply toward a heavy metal door marked, "Authorized personnel only." Beyond it lay the hospital's oxygen control room and mechanical systems. Sherman gave another warning growl. Ethan's heartbeat skipped. That movement. He knew it. He had seen it before. Not once, not twice. Dozens of times. Afghanistan, Helmand Province, 12 years earlier. A convoy had stopped beside an abandoned school. Everything looked peaceful. Children's toys lay scattered across the dirt. No gunfire, no movement, no enemy. The soldiers relaxed. But Sherman hadn't. He refused to walk another step. He kept sniffing the air instead of the road. Then he turned toward an old ventilation pipe sticking out of the ground, exactly like now. Exactly. Minutes later, engineers discovered explosives hidden beneath the school building, enough to kill everyone in the convoy. Sherman had smelled chemicals leaking through the underground ventilation shaft before any detector found them. That day had saved Ethan's entire platoon. Since then, Ethan had made himself one promise. If Sherman ever reacted like that again, he would never ignore him. Back in the present, Ethan looked once more toward the ventilation system above the NICU. The air smelled perfectly normal, cold, clean, sterile, nothing unusual, at least to human senses. Sherman suddenly walked several steps toward the mechanical door. His nose touched the crack beneath it. He inhaled deeply, then scratched the floor twice, stopped, scratched twice again, the exact alert pattern he had used during military detection work. Ethan felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. "No," he whispered, "it can't be." The mechanical room door suddenly opened. A maintenance supervisor stepped out carrying a clipboard. "There you are, Walker." Ethan stood. "We've got another lighting issue on the 3rd floor." He glanced back at Sherman. The dog refused to leave the doorway. His amber eyes remained fixed somewhere beyond the steel door. "What is it with your dog today?" the supervisor laughed. "Smells somebody's lunch?" Ethan forced a weak smile. "Maybe." But inside, his instincts screamed otherwise. Across the hallway, Olivia slowly emerged from Noah's room. She had heard the growl earlier. Now she noticed Sherman standing perfectly still. Their eyes met. For the first time all morning, Noah had stabilized. And, strangely, Sherman had stopped growling. Instead, he simply watched the young mother with a quiet sadness that felt almost human. Olivia walked over hesitantly. "Is he always like this?" Ethan shook his head. "No." She knelt a few feet away. Sherman slowly approached her. He didn't ask for attention. He didn't wag his tail. He merely lowered his head into Olivia's shaking hands. The exhausted mother burst into tears. "I don't want to lose my little boy." Sherman remained perfectly still, letting her cry into his thick fur. Ethan watched silently. The old soldier had seen grief on battlefields. He knew there were moments when words only made pain louder. After nearly a minute, Sherman gently lifted his head. He looked back toward the ventilation system one last time, then toward Noah's room, then back at Ethan. The message was unmistakable. The danger hadn't passed. It had only just begun. By noon, word about the maintenance man's strange dog had spread through the pediatric wing. Some nurses smiled when they saw Sherman. Others crossed the hallway to avoid him. Every time Ethan walked past the NICU, Sherman slowed to a stop. His nose lifted, his eyes fixed on the ventilation duct that disappeared into the ceiling above Noah's room. He never barked. He simply watched, as if waiting for something. Ethan tried to focus on work. He replaced emergency lights, reset electrical breakers, inspected backup generators. But every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward Sherman. The old German shepherd had spent years ignoring distractions. If he remained locked onto one target for this long, there had to be a reason. Finally, Ethan unclipped his flashlight and quietly opened a ceiling access panel in the hallway. He shined the beam into the ventilation shaft. Dust, metal ductwork. Nothing unusual. No strange odor. No visible damage. He climbed back down, feeling almost embarrassed. Maybe age had finally caught up with Sherman. Maybe retirement had blurred instincts that had once saved lives. Before Ethan could convince himself further, Sherman suddenly stood. He walked directly beneath another air vent, nearly 30 feet farther down the hallway. His nose twitched. Then he looked back at Ethan. Again. "Mr. Walker," a sharp voice echoed behind him. Ethan turned to find Angela Brooks, the hospital's operations director, approaching with 2 security officers. Her tailored navy suit looked untouched by the busy hospital around her. "I've received several complaints," Ethan frowned. "About what?" She glanced coldly at Sherman. "Your dog. He isn't bothering anyone. He frightened parents this morning. He barked once. In the neonatal unit." Her expression hardened. "This isn't a military base, Mr. Walker. It's a hospital." "I understand." "Then you also understand animals are not permitted near critical care unless they're officially authorized." Ethan nodded slowly. "He's retired." "Then perhaps retirement should happen at home." Sherman quietly stepped beside Ethan. He never growled, never showed aggression. His calmness somehow made the confrontation even more uncomfortable. Angela folded her arms. "If I see this dog near the NICU again, security will escort both of you off hospital property." One of the guards shifted awkwardly. Even he seemed reluctant. Sherman looked more like an old family pet than a threat. Still, orders were orders. Ethan clipped the leash tighter. "Come on, buddy." This time, Sherman obeyed. But as they turned away, the old dog stopped once more. He looked over his shoulder, not at Angela, not at the guards, at the air vent above Noah's room. A soft, mournful whine escaped his throat. Olivia happened to step out of the room at that exact moment. She watched Sherman with puzzled eyes. "He keeps looking up there," she said quietly. Ethan followed her gaze. "I noticed. Do you think he senses something?" He hesitated. "If anyone else asked me that," he forced a tired smile, "I'd probably say no." "But?" Ethan looked down at Sherman. "I spent 12 years trusting this dog with my life. He never reacted without a reason." Angela overheard the conversation. Her patience vanished. "This is exactly the kind of rumor we don't need." She pointed toward the exit. "Take your dog and finish your maintenance work somewhere else." The hallway fell silent. Ethan gave one final look toward the ceiling. Sherman gave one final look toward the vent. Neither of them could explain why, but both felt the same thing. Something hidden inside those walls was getting worse, and no one in the hospital was willing to listen. The next morning, Ethan arrived earlier than usual. He barely slept the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sherman standing beneath the ventilation duct, refusing to move. After years of trusting the old German Shepherd's instincts in war zones, Ethan couldn't convince himself that this was simply old age or confusion. Sherman had been wrong about many things in life, never about danger. Inside the NICU, Noah looked weaker than he had the previous day. His breathing was shallow, and his tiny chest struggled against every inhale. Olivia sat beside the incubator with dark circles beneath her eyes, silently humming a lullaby she had sung since the day he was born. The monitors showed that his oxygen level remained acceptable, yet something about his color bothered her. His lips seemed slightly pale again. The doctors adjusted medications, changed IV fluids, and reassured her that fluctuations were normal, but a mother's heart rarely accepted easy explanations. When Ethan passed the nursery doors, Sherman immediately slowed. This time, however, he didn't stop beneath the same vent. Instead, he quietly walked farther down the hallway until he reached another air outlet near the nurse's station. He sniffed once, then returned to Noah's room, repeating the path several times. He wasn't wandering, he was tracing something. Ethan watched carefully as Sherman connected invisible points that no human could see, almost like following a scent drifting through the ventilation system. Olivia noticed the strange behavior through the glass. Curiosity overcame exhaustion, and she stepped into the hallway. "He's doing it again," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "He's following the airflow." She frowned. But why would he care about air vents? Ethan hesitated before answering. Because that's exactly how he worked overseas. Explosives, chemical leaks, hidden fires. Sherman always followed the air before he found the source. Olivia looked back toward Noah sleeping inside the incubator, and for the first time, an uncomfortable thought crossed her mind. What if Sherman wasn't reacting to the baby at all? Just then, Noah's monitor emitted another sharp warning tone. Nurses rushed inside, checking every line and every setting. Within minutes, his oxygen level recovered again. Everyone relaxed. Everyone except Sherman. Instead of looking toward the incubator, he turned once more toward the ceiling vent above Noah's bed. A low whine escaped his throat, deeper and more urgent than before. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. 3 times in less than 24 hours, Noah's condition had worsened at the exact moment Sherman reacted to the ventilation system. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. But after surviving battlefields together, Ethan had learned one lesson that had kept them both alive. Patterns save lives long before proof ever does. The uneasy feeling followed Ethan throughout the day. He finished replacing lights in the West Wing, but his thoughts never strayed far from the NICU. Every few hours he found an excuse to walk past the neonatal unit, and every single time Sherman reacted the same way. The old German shepherd would pause beneath the ventilation ducts, lift his nose into the air, and stare toward the mechanical corridor behind the intensive care rooms. Whatever he was detecting wasn't disappearing. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger. That afternoon, Ethan finally made a decision. Instead of heading home after his shift, he signed out a portable gas analyzer from the maintenance department. The device wasn't sophisticated enough to detect every airborne contaminant, but it could identify carbon monoxide and several industrial gases. If Sherman was sensing something unusual, Ethan wanted more than instinct. He wanted evidence. The mechanical corridor behind the NICU was unusually quiet. Large insulated pipes stretched across the ceiling beside thick oxygen lines that fed every incubator in the ward. Ethan slowly walked along the network while Sherman moved several feet ahead, nose close to the floor. Suddenly, the dog stopped beside an old brass valve that looked decades older than the surrounding equipment. Sherman sniffed intensely, then scratched the concrete twice before backing away. Ethan frowned and raised the analyzer toward the pipe. The screen remained at 0. He checked again. Still nothing. He was about to dismiss the idea when Sherman ignored the valve completely and moved toward a narrow section where 2 pipes met behind an insulated cover. The dog whined softly, pressing his nose against a tiny crack no wider than a coin. Curious, Ethan crouched and carefully pulled back a loose strip of insulation. His heart skipped. The metal beneath was badly corroded. Rust had eaten deep into the joint, leaving a hairline fracture barely visible to the naked eye. Ethan held the analyzer closer. This time, the display flickered. 3 parts per million, 5 parts per million, 8 parts per million. The numbers were low, far below the threshold that would trigger the hospital's automatic alarms. But they shouldn't have been there at all. He checked again. The reading climbed briefly before falling back. "Carbon monoxide," Ethan whispered. "Not enough to harm a healthy adult. Not enough for maintenance sensors to classify as an emergency." But Noah wasn't a healthy adult. He was an 8-month-old premature infant whose lungs were already struggling to survive. Ethan suddenly understood why Sherman had been tracing the ventilation system instead of barking at the baby. The leaking gas wasn't concentrated in one place. Tiny amounts were drifting through the airflow, spreading invisibly through the NICU. Every breath Noah took could be making him weaker, even while every machine insisted he was receiving perfectly normal oxygen. Sherman looked up at Ethan with calm, unwavering eyes. The old soldier felt a chill run through his spine. For 2 days, everyone had trusted the hospital's instruments. The only one who had noticed the danger had been a retired military dog. Ethan didn't waste a second. He photographed the corroded pipe, the fluctuating gas readings, and the cracked insulation from every angle before calling the maintenance supervisor. Within minutes, 3 engineers arrived at the mechanical corridor, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as Ethan explained what Sherman had led him to. The oldest engineer knelt beside the damaged joint and ran a flashlight across the rusted metal. "This shouldn't even be here," he muttered. "This section was scheduled for replacement almost a year ago." He checked the maintenance tag hanging from the pipe, then frowned. "Someone signed off on the inspection without replacing it." "So we shut the system down," Ethan said firmly. "Right now." The three engineers exchanged uneasy glances. "It's not that simple," one of them replied. Before Ethan could ask why, footsteps echoed through the corridor. Angela Brooks appeared with the hospital's chief administrator, Richard Halston, followed by two department managers. Their expressions made it clear they had already decided how this conversation would end. Richard glanced briefly at the pipe before folding his arms. "I've reviewed the preliminary report." "You've reviewed it?" Ethan asked in disbelief. "There's carbon monoxide leaking into the ventilation system. The readings are extremely low. They're still there. They remain below federal emergency thresholds." Ethan stared at him. "You've got premature babies upstairs." Richard's voice remained calm. "And shutting down the central oxygen system means evacuating every infant in the NICU." "Exactly. It also means closing this hospital's neonatal services indefinitely." Silence settled over the corridor. Finally, Angela spoke. "Tomorrow morning, the State Children's Healthcare Commission arrives for its annual accreditation inspection." Ethan frowned. "So? If inspectors find the NICU closed because of a failed oxygen distribution system, we risk losing our Level 4 certification." Richard continued where she left off. "We've spent years building this program. Losing certification would cost this hospital millions in grants and research funding." Ethan felt heat rising in his chest. "So your solution is to leave those babies breathing contaminated air?" "No," Richard answered smoothly. "Our solution is to monitor the situation until inspectors finish tomorrow afternoon. Once they leave, repairs can begin immediately." For a long moment, Ethan simply looked at him, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You're asking me to keep quiet." "I'm asking you to think responsibly. The responsible thing is shutting that unit down." "The responsible thing," Richard replied, "is avoiding unnecessary panic over readings that may not even be clinically significant." Before Ethan could answer, Sherman suddenly stood. The old German shepherd walked back to the cracked pipe and let out a deep, unmistakable growl. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough to fill the narrow mechanical corridor with a warning no human instrument could express. Everyone turned toward the dog. No one spoke. Ethan rested a hand on Sherman's neck and looked directly into Richard's eyes. "I trusted this dog in Afghanistan, when bombs were buried beneath our feet." He paused, his voice low but steady. "And today, I trust him a lot more than I trust your priorities." Ethan left the mechanical corridor with a knot in his stomach. He had spent 22 years following orders, first in the Marines, then in civilian maintenance. But there was one lesson combat had taught him better than anything else. The most dangerous words in the world were, "We'll deal with it tomorrow." Too many good people had died because someone believed danger could wait. Sherman walked beside him in complete silence, but the old German shepherd's pace had quickened. His ears remained forward, and every few steps he glanced toward the NICU, as if checking whether they were heading in the right direction. Ethan didn't need a leash anymore. Sherman already knew where he wanted to go. Inside Noah's room, Olivia noticed the change immediately. The baby had been sleeping peacefully only minutes earlier. Now his tiny body was restless beneath the blanket. His breathing became faster, and his little fingers curled tightly into fists. The monitor beside his incubator began flashing yellow before a sharp alarm echoed through the room. "Oxygen saturation falling," a nurse called. 91. 87. Another nurse hurried in with a respiratory therapist while Dr. Melissa Grant rushed to the bedside. Adjustments were made within seconds, but Noah's numbers continued dropping. Outside the glass, Sherman suddenly froze. His head snapped toward the ceiling vent above Noah's incubator. Then, without warning, he barked. Once, twice. The deep, urgent sound echoed through the hallway, startling everyone nearby. Several parents looked up in confusion. Angela Brooks stepped out of her office, her face already dark with irritation. "I told you that dog was not to be anywhere near this unit." Before Ethan could answer, Sherman lunged toward the ventilation grate. He wasn't attacking it. He was trying desperately to reach it, scratching at the wall with powerful paws, while whining louder than Ethan had ever heard. "Sherman!" Ethan called. The dog ignored him. He had done the same thing years earlier in Afghanistan, moments before engineers uncovered a buried chemical cache beneath a collapsed warehouse. That memory hit Ethan like a punch. Something had changed. The concentration was increasing. At that exact moment, another alarm sounded, not from Noah's room this time, but from the neighboring incubator. A newborn girl suddenly struggled to breathe. Within seconds, a third monitor began beeping farther down the NICU. The nurses looked at one another in disbelief. 3 infants, 3 respiratory events, almost simultaneously. Dr. Grant's expression shifted from calm concentration to genuine concern. "This isn't normal," she whispered. Ethan didn't wait for permission. He turned and sprinted toward the mechanical corridor with Sherman racing beside him. The old German shepherd reached the corroded pipe first, barking furiously at the cracked joint. Ethan looked at the pressure gauge mounted beside it. The needle was climbing. Slowly, steadily. Whatever had been leaking for days was no longer a slow leak. It was becoming a failure. Ethan's hand hovered over the large red emergency shutoff valve. If he closed it, the entire oxygen distribution system for the NICU would stop instantly. Hospital administrators would be furious. But if he didn't, Sherman had already made his choice. Now Ethan had to make his. Ethan closed his eyes for only a fraction of a second. Then he grabbed the red emergency shutoff valve with both hands and pulled it down. A heavy metallic clang echoed through the mechanical room. Instantly, warning sirens exploded throughout the hospital. Red emergency lights began flashing across the corridor. "Central oxygen supply interrupted. Central oxygen supply interrupted." The automated announcement repeated over the speakers. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to stop. Then chaos erupted. Inside the NICU, ventilators switched to battery backup, while emergency oxygen cylinders activated automatically beside every incubator. Nurses rushed from room to room with practiced speed, disconnecting infants from the central system and attaching them to portable units. "What happened?" someone shouted. "We lost the main oxygen line." Dr. Melissa Grant didn't waste time asking questions. "Manual ventilation stations, move now!" Parents began crying. Doctors yelled instructions across the ward. Monitors filled the air with overlapping alarms. Yet amid the confusion, Sherman remained completely focused. The old German shepherd suddenly turned away from the oxygen room and sprinted down the hallway. Ethan followed without hesitation. "Where are you going, buddy?" Sherman ignored him. He stopped outside an electrical service closet located just beyond the NICU entrance. His ears flattened as he sniffed beneath the door. Then he barked furiously, pawing at the metal with such force that the entire door rattled. A faint crackling sound answered him from inside. Ethan's stomach tightened. He pulled the maintenance key from his belt and unlocked the door. The moment it swung open, a wave of scorching heat rushed into the hallway. "Everyone back!" he shouted. Inside the narrow electrical room, thick smoke curled from the main distribution panel. Several heavy cables glowed an angry orange beneath melted insulation, and tiny sparks danced along the overloaded circuits. The damaged oxygen pipe hadn't been the only problem. The leaking gas had allowed corrosion to spread through nearby electrical equipment, and the failing panel was only seconds away from igniting. If the oxygen system had remained under full pressure, if the donor inspection had started as planned, if Sherman hadn't refused to leave, the fire would have erupted directly beside the NICU. Dozens of premature babies would have been trapped. Ethan grabbed the emergency electrical disconnect and slammed it downward. The lights flickered violently before emergency generators roared to life. Almost immediately, firefighters arrived through the service entrance, dragging hoses and thermal cameras into the corridor. "The panel's overheating," Ethan warned. "We've got it," the fire captain answered. Behind him, smoke continued pouring from the room as firefighters attacked the growing electrical fire before it could spread into the hospital walls. Meanwhile, the evacuation of the NICU continued with remarkable discipline. Olivia walked beside Noah's transport incubator, tears streaming down her face as nurses hurried toward the emergency elevators. She looked over her shoulder just in time to see Sherman sitting calmly in the hallway, watching every incubator pass before finally allowing himself to relax. The old German shepherd slowly lowered his tired body onto the floor. For the first time in 2 days, he stopped growling, because the danger he had been trying so desperately to warn them about was finally impossible for everyone else to ignore. By sunrise, the fire had been extinguished, but the hospital remained sealed behind yellow caution tape. Fire investigators moved in and out of the mechanical corridor, while state inspectors photographed the burned electrical panel and the corroded oxygen lines. What had begun as a routine donor inspection had become an emergency investigation. Ethan stood quietly beside Sherman in the parking lot, watching firefighters carry damaged equipment into evidence trucks. The old German shepherd looked exhausted, his gray muzzle resting against Ethan's boot, but every so often he lifted his head toward the hospital, as if making certain the danger was truly over. An investigator approached Ethan carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Walker, we'd like you to walk us through everything from the beginning." Ethan didn't mention instinct. He didn't mention miracles. Instead, he described every fact exactly as it happened. Sherman's repeated alerts, the corroded pipe, the low carbon monoxide readings, the administrator's refusal to shut down the NICU, and finally, the electrical panel that nearly ignited beside the nursery. The investigator wrote quietly before asking one final question. "Can anyone confirm that management knew about these problems before yesterday?" Ethan looked down. "I don't know." A familiar voice interrupted him. "I can." Everyone turned. A man wearing faded maintenance coveralls stepped forward, carrying a thick cardboard archive box. "My name's Daniel Foster," he said. "I've worked maintenance here for 16 years. He placed the box on the hood of a patrol car and opened it. Inside were dozens of inspection reports, work orders, repair requests, photographs, each one marked with bright red stickers reading, "Urgent." Daniel pulled out the oldest file. 8 months ago, we reported corrosion around the oxygen distribution pipes. Another folder. 6 months ago, we documented overheating inside the electrical cabinet. Another. 3 months ago, we recommended shutting down the entire mechanical corridor until repairs were completed. The lead investigator slowly turned each page. Every report carried signatures. Every recommendation had one final stamp across the bottom. Repair deferred. Reason? Budget priorities. Ethan felt anger rise in his chest. "They knew," Daniel nodded sadly. We filed report after report. So why didn't you go public? The maintenance worker looked toward the hospital. Because every time someone spoke up, they were told the same thing. He swallowed hard. Wait until after the next inspection. Wait until after the next donor visit. Wait until next quarter's budget. His voice cracked. We kept waiting. Nearby, Olivia stepped out of the ambulance where Noah had spent the night under observation. A pediatric specialist smiled as he handed her the latest chart. His oxygen levels have remained stable since he was removed from that ward. Tears filled Olivia's eyes. For the first time in weeks, Noah's cheeks carried real color again. She looked across the parking lot at Sherman. The old German shepherd slowly stood. Their eyes met. Without a single command, without a single bark, both mother and dog seemed to understand the same truth. Sherman hadn't saved Noah because he was extraordinary. He had saved him because he refused to ignore a warning that everyone else had chosen to postpone. And now, with years of buried reports finally lying open beneath the morning sun, no one could bury the truth any longer. 3 months later, the first snow of winter dusted the streets outside Children's Mercy Hospital. Sunlight poured through the windows of the pediatric rehabilitation wing, warming the small playroom where laughter had slowly returned after months of fear. Noah sat on a colorful blanket, wobbling as he reached for a bright wooden toy. His movements were still cautious, but each day he grew stronger. The oxygen tubes were gone. The constant alarms had been replaced by ordinary sounds, a nurse laughing in the hallway, children playing nearby, and the soft voice of his mother reading from a picture book. Olivia watched him with tears quietly filling her eyes. There had been a time when doctors believed she was counting her son's final days. Now they were discussing his first birthday. Across the room, Sherman lay peacefully beside Ethan's chair. Age had slowed the old German shepherd, and the gray around his muzzle had spread even farther. But whenever Noah laughed, Sherman's ears still lifted with quiet satisfaction. The little boy smiled, crawled across the blanket, and wrapped both tiny arms around the old dog's neck. Sherman didn't move. He simply rested his head gently beside Noah's shoulder, watching over him exactly as he had from the very beginning. A photographer quietly captured the moment. It would appear on the front page of the local newspaper the following morning, beneath a simple headline, "Retired military dog credited with saving NICU babies." The investigation had uncovered far more than anyone expected. Hospital records revealed years of ignored maintenance reports, postponed repairs, and financial decisions that placed budgets above patient safety. Several senior administrators resigned before disciplinary hearings began. State regulators permanently revised inspection procedures for neonatal units, requiring independent reviews of ventilation systems and emergency infrastructure in children's hospitals across the state. More importantly, no other child would have to breathe through the same dangerous system again. A week later, the city held a small ceremony outside the fire department. There were no television cameras, no famous politicians, just firefighters, nurses, maintenance workers, and dozens of grateful families whose children had survived the evacuation. When Ethan's name was called, he quietly stepped back. "It wasn't me," he said with a small smile. He rested a weathered hand on Sherman's shoulders. "I only listened." The crowd fell silent. The fire chief knelt and placed a blue ribbon around Sherman's neck. The old German shepherd blinked in confusion as children clapped and parents wiped away tears. For a moment, Ethan was reminded of the battlefield where Sherman had first taught him that courage didn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply refused to walk away. As the ceremony ended, Olivia approached carrying Noah in her arms. She knelt beside Sherman. "You gave my son a future," she whispered. Noah reached forward with his tiny hand, gently touching the metal hanging around Sherman's neck before breaking into the brightest laugh Ethan had ever heard. Sherman closed his eyes. His tail tapped softly against the pavement. It was the only reward he had ever wanted. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs, ask for nothing in return, and quietly remind us of a truth the world too often forgets. When everyone else ignores the first warning, love is often the only voice willing to listen. As we finish this story, remember that God's miracles don't always come in extraordinary ways. Sometimes they arrive through a loyal dog, a kind stranger, or the courage to do the right thing when no one else will. If we keep our hearts open, we'll often find that God is working even when we can't yet see His plan. Life isn't always easy. We all face struggles, loss, and uncertainty. But every new day is another chance to choose hope over fear, kindness over anger, and faith over despair. Never stop believing that better days are ahead. I'd like to share something personal. Even though I'm raising 2 wonderful children on my own, and life can be difficult at times, I choose to stay positive and keep moving forward. My faith reminds me that every challenge carries a lesson, and every tomorrow holds new hope. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you love. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe to support the channel. Your encouragement means more than you know. May God bless you and your family with health, peace, joy, and hope. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.